digital assets policy in general, all the upside is to be for it. Yeah. There's no votes now to be won by being against digital assets, because a lot of that brand risk has, your political brand risk has been removed. There's now more brand risk to be opposed.
Welcome to the ATX DAO podcast, the hub for exploring the forefront of blockchain technology in Austin's Web3 community. We connect you with innovators within ATX DAO and beyond as we venture into the world of decentralized technology. So crack open a beer and join us for a front row seat to learn about the innovations and trends shaping our digital future. This is the ATX DAO podcast.
Lee, welcome to the ATX DAO podcast. For the audience, we are on a field trip. Meg and I drove up to the beautiful city of Dallas. You can see the hub of activity we were just talking about. It's an insane, it's an amazing city. I think people in Austin really downplay it, but we're here because it's an important episode, important guest. We want to do it in person because, vibes are better in person. It's just more fun for everyone. So thank you for joining.
It's an honor. Thanks for having me. This is a fun conversation. I've known you guys for a long time, and y'all have been tireless advocates over the years, and it's just great to be on with you guys.
Yeah, it's good to be on your ground too. I know you spend so much time coming down to Austin to see us or just be in Austin for policy advocacy and things too, so it's nice to be on your home turf as well.
Yeah. So podcast questions format, we did the kickoff. Typically we start with kind of the origin story, right? Then we can talk about the TBC, vision, what you guys are up to, your conference, agenda, whatever. Then we can chat a little bit. I know we're excited about the DAO bill. We just got off a great call, getting pumped up about that, and we'll just see where it goes from there. But pretty free-flowing.
Sounds great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, let's hear about you, Lee Bratcher. What's your background, both personal and professional, and how did whatever that journey looks like take you into Web3 and blockchain?
Yeah. Ironically, I grew up in Austin, went to high school at Westwood High School, came up to Dallas for college, joined the military after college because it was 2010 when I graduated and there weren't that many jobs. So I went to officer candidacy school at Fort Benning, Georgia, been in the reserves for the last 14 years. And of course, in the reserves, you have a parallel career track. So when I got done with my military training, I went into some higher education, did graduate work at St. Mary's in international relations, and then at UT Dallas, also in international relations. And my research area was blockchain and, first it was property rights. Mm-hmm. And I went up to the Army War College in Pennsylvania and discovered this nexus between blockchain, property rights, digital property rights, Bitcoin. It was sort of an opportunity for me to expand my research. My research was based on a couple different academics. One of them was Hernando de Soto. He's a Peruvian economist who talks a lot about property rights and how property rights increases human flourishing and economic activity. And I think essentially we can't transplant property rights like we can translate intellectual property, right? That can be stolen. It's much more concrete. Property rights are sort of a learned norm that come along with decades of rule of law and other institutions. And I think we're learning that norm in digital assets now. We're creating additional norms around property rights that are digital property rights. And so I formed the TBC kind of with that background in 2019 as a political science professor. It's kind of the job I had been doing several years before forming the TBC, and then formed the TBC as a side hustle, not knowing that it would grow one day into my full-time job. And I think in 2021 was when I left being a professor to work at the TBC full-time.
It's quite a side hustle.
Yeah.
That's cool. I know the property rights thing is interesting. As I get further and further into trying to understand what's happening in crypto and blockchain from all angles, you start getting into the philosophy and almost it's like I don't know, from my understanding, it's kind of like a Western idea, and it's like such a fundamentally American philosophy about how property rights introduces different types of freedoms or individualistic like outcomes. And I think like Eric Voorhees did a talk at Consensus. I don't know if you were at that dinner, but he talked a lot about property rights and crypto and stuff. So it's interesting.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, I think probably originally a European idea, but made popular by the U.S.
Yeah.
Sort of in the public consciousness. Similar to, we talk about states in a little bit, like LLCs were invented in Wyoming, but made popular by, Delaware is like the hub of corporation formation. Right. And but that's not necessarily where they originated.
That's cool. So. Yeah. The academic background is cool. It's interesting as well. So when you were, so it was like your studies kind of brought you to blockchain, but like when you were when you were teaching, were you teaching about blockchain as well, or or like digital property rights? Were you like a professor of it, or what was going on?
Yeah, I was a professor of international relations, but I was a guest professor in the School of Business for one blockchain class. Mm-hmm. So there was some overlap. At the time, I had gone up and gotten some training from IBM's Watson Research Center. There was a lot of hype around like enterprise blockchain at that point. And, I think enterprise blockchain is still, it's gone through Gartner's hype cycle where there was a big hype around it. There's the trough of disillusionment, and now there's actually, real enterprise blockchain happening. Now, most of that's going to migrate to public chains. I think that's my view, and probably y'all's as well. There's not much of a reason for too many private or hybrid chains, but there is a reason for private blockchains and hybrid chains, and not a singular reason. I mean, like there are, I think, modest reasons. Private blockchains are not transformational in nature, right? They are sort of iterative, mm-hmm. or maybe a step function increase, whereas a public blockchain like Bitcoin, Ethereum, et cetera, are transformational.
Yeah.
Right. That's a whole dynamic shift. So
society.
Yeah, I put them in different categories. I'm not one to denigrate one or the other. Just like one is transformational and therefore harder to explain. Yeah. The other is just a step function change and just an improvement. But a little bit easier for people to grasp. And I think that's why you had that movement in like the 2016 to 2020 era of, enterprise blockchain was huge. And so IBM dove into that. I think they lost a lot of money over that period. But
there's many such cases.
Yeah.
Well, it's like anything. It's what are you trying to do, and what are the tools that are going to get it done.
Yeah.
And so just recognizing that there's different ways to do the exact same thing. And just comes back to what's your bigger mission? What are you really trying to fulfill? So interested, maybe you can talk a little bit about what's really for the rest of 2024. What's the big goals for TBC? Where are you personally spending your time and energy focusing there?
Yeah, we are preparing for the next legislative session in Texas. We're also tracking all this federal stuff that's going on. So I was in D.C. a few weeks ago before the FIT 21 and SAB 121 bill, lobbying different Democratic elected officials from the state of Texas to vote for the bill. Yeah. Because we knew that the number of Democrats that voted for the bill would directly impact the likelihood of it having a fair hearing in the Senate.
Yes.
And on both counts, we were blown away by the number of Democrats that voted.
Like 2 times the amount expected, right?
Correct. Yeah. Perhaps even more than that. I think just depends on who you talk to, but yeah, we would say double the number, and that's pretty significant.
Yeah.
So
it's pretty awesome.
But in Texas, we have a session every other year, so it's kind of hard to explain that to most people. They think that legislatures are in session year-round, or at least every year. Yeah. But I think a lot of Texans even would be surprised that the legislature in Texas meets every other year.
For only 4 months.
Yeah.
I think it's hilarious. I love it. I love using that as kind of like a metaphor for Texas in general, very hands-off. What is it? I think when we were in the Capitol in 2020, 2022 or 2023, I think Jacob or someone was like, yes, this establishment is built to kill bills. It's built to make sure no new laws are passed.
Yeah.
Like the limited window of time is definitely part of that.
Right.
But it's funny.
And like the average time it takes to pass a bill in Texas is 3 sessions, which is 6 years. It's like you think about how much like just anything changes over the course of, on the closer to a decade than a year or two. So it's crazy.
It is crazy.
That's average.
Yeah.
So going on legislation, or did you have a comment?
Oh, just to say that we've seen the same thing. That's the average, and in any given session, you might have 10% of the bills that are filed pass, or less, oftentimes.
It's a prestigious college acceptance rate. Yeah. Okay, so you're talking about TBC being a side hustle at first, but you guys have a track record of passing a non-trivial amount of bills into law in Texas. When did you? So you transitioned to full time, I guess. What was that like? And also, when was your first big win, right? Because that momentum you guys have is no joke.
Yeah, I'd say that like some bills are easier to pass than others. So like the blockchain working group bill was an easy one to pass. It created a working group that had members appointed by the governor, the speaker, and the lieutenant governor. There was no fiscal note or budgetary constraint. So it didn't take a lot of political capital or lobbying heft to pass that one. But we have passed some others since then that have been much more challenging. The Uniform Commercial Code changes to digital assets, that establish that you can perfect your security interest in a digital asset through possession of the keys or majority of the keys if it's a multi-sig. That was a pretty substantial win because we passed that over opposition from a variety of other industry trade groups. And so when you have nobody opposed to a bill, sometimes they just float on through. But if there's significant opposition, that's when bills just die. Because nobody wants to spend political capital and to risk a backlash with different groups, especially if there's not really much to gain from it. So we're quite proud of that one. We're also proud of the proof of reserves bill that we passed this last session in the 88th legislative session, which was the 23 session. The DAO bill, we got through the House in the 23 session. As you guys are well aware, it was a painful process. We couldn't get a hearing in the Business and Commerce Committee in the Senate just because we were up against the time clock. And I think it ends up being an okay thing. Well, a little unfortunate because Wyoming beat us to the punch. But we now are coming back with a much better crafted and more considered piece of policy.
Yeah, I mean, when we initially started working on the bill, internally or with Jacob, we ATX DAO is a policy quote unquote organization. It was very nascent, and we learned a lot from y'all in the process. But the fact that you're fighting against time, right? Even if everybody in the Senate was we like this bill, when you get to the last 2 weeks of session, it's a 4-month session, then you just are going to get beaten by the clock because there are more important things at that point in time than playing with a very out there to many people idea, which is the decentralized organization, which for us, we're oh, it's amazing, of course, we all love it, but as we know, some people are well, what are you even talking about? Why does this even matter?
Well, it's two dry subjects, right? To the people who aren't already familiar, it's the DAO concept and business entity code, which isn't something that most people care about.
Yeah,
right.
It's not that exciting. Yeah, there's a little bit of calculus there. You probably don't win that many votes or that much accolades by being aggressively for a concept like that at the beginning, but you could look foolish on the downside. Now, that calculus is changing. I think all the education that's taking place, all of the advocacy that's taking place, the pressure both at the national and state level, it's almost reversed now. And maybe not necessarily for the DAO bill in Texas, but for digital assets policy in general, all the upside is to be for it. There's no votes now to be won by being against digital assets, because a lot of that brand risk has, your political brand risk has been removed. There's now more brand risk to be opposed.
Yes.
So I think that's a big shift of the last 2 years, and a shift that's pretty remarkable given that it was only a year and a half ago that FTX blew up.
Yeah, it's wild. I mean, the industry bounced back so hard.
Yeah.
We've never been. I mean, people that are outside of it don't even know we're at all-time highs.
Yeah.
And a lot of people, like even in the space, aren't super aware of the fact that we doubled the Democratic support in the House that we thought we had.
Yeah.
Very exciting.
But still, the FTX burn is what was painted in the media, and that's the narrative that people outside the space have. And I mean, that's always a question I hear too, is like, well, isn't everyone in crypto doing fraudulent stuff? And it's like probably about the same percentage of people who are doing it in traditional finance markets.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, and even by some measures less.
Yeah, because of the public
Right.
ledger.
Yeah.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you look at some report, the CIA director came out several years ago and said that we've crossed the threshold where there's actually more black market activity in traditional banking and dollar denominated and even cash than there is in crypto. And I think we're continuing on that, and Chainalysis has incredible research that demonstrates there certainly still is black market and nefarious activity that takes place in crypto, but we're human beings, and we're by our very nature there's going to be that in any system. There's no perfect system, and so a better system is something that we're working to build. And it's pretty amazing that we've already achieved sort of that velocity, moving beyond the per capita percentage of nefarious and black market activity so early.
Yeah.
I would have thought if I hadn't have looked at the data, that it would have taken decades. But to do that in just a matter of 1 decade is, I think, pretty amazing.
That is amazing.
It's cool. So you guys are passing laws in Texas. It's a very pro-crypto jurisdiction. That's the stated purpose of TBC. What type of legislation, so it's like, okay, the working group legislation, that's easy. Like the other one you're talking about, you had to overcome opposition. The DAO bill, we're going to get it done. I think we're both confident in it, but we have to do some legwork ahead of time. What is a really challenging, transformational type of thing that you could do in Texas with blockchain to improve society, right? Because you have folks in the industry, they profess revolutionary ways of using NFTs or whatever, for example, or a blockchain ledger, anything you could say, this is going to make our government so much more efficient. This is going to make everyone's life so much better. What are some examples that you think we could actually do? It may be in the long term, right? But what is a law you could get passed that would actually improve government operations or something? It's a broad question, really, but big brain stuff.
I have a couple thoughts on that. One is, I think, you just need clarity for businesses and the private sector to innovate.
Yeah.
Right. So I think these big ideas are going to be not, create or enabled because of legislation, but they're going to entrepreneurs and people with strategic thinking capacity are going to come to Texas to develop those. And perhaps we don't even have a conceptual framework for them yet. So that's, I don't know if there's really necessarily anything, any law that we could pass that would enable that. One thing that I would say is a little bit counterintuitive is we actually need to provide more funding for our regulators, which people are going to be shocked at that. But and I would have years ago too. I come from a background of sort of limited government thinking, and I still think that way.
Yeah.
But having watched regulators like the Department of Banking and the Texas State Securities Board and some of these other regulators, even federal regulators, I think federal regulators are probably funded sufficiently. But a lot of the state regulators are actually funded in ways that limits their ability to provide guidance to industry. So I think increasing some funding for some of those key financial services regulators would be one area that we could make some real progress in. I think also establishing a Texas sort of innovation division within the Department of Information Resources, DIR, Texas DIR, will be really helpful, because none of these government agencies have the bandwidth or, again, resources to adopt AI, blockchain, transformational technologies at the level that they otherwise could. And so to standardize some of that and to create some best practices from an entity within the Texas government, to where then we can be putting car titles on. So there's not really any one.
Yeah.
There's not really any one thing that's going to be totally transformational. But once you have every single interaction with government being automated and driven by attestations and digital proofs and digital identifiers, and that experience from a privacy protection perspective, right? I'm not suggesting we go the China model of totalitarianism and like a CBDC or anything like that. But from appropriate privacy controlled perspectives, if we have the citizens' experience and interaction with government from start to finish, be orders of magnitude more efficient, then the time that it takes to start a business is often a metric that people use as determining like a country's business friendliness, right? And the U.S. There's tons of other metrics too, though, like your percentage of your real estate transaction that gets eaten up by fees.
Yeah.
So anything from like car titling to real estate transactions to even like boring stuff like money market funds and tokenizing money market funds, so that you could use that as collateral, being able to use like security T-bills as collateral.
Yeah.
There's just a ton of different things out there that are kind of boring problems, but when you take them and you're decreasing fees from 6% to 2%, that's a significant change.
Yeah.
When you're decreasing the time it takes to start a business from 30 days to 5 days, or even like a day, that's a significant change. I mean, you're talking about just societal transformation that, again, it's hard to put your finger on any like one like massive use case.
Mm-hmm. Well, those are pretty big.
But there's hundreds of them. Yeah.
Well, that's like the overarching thing I'm getting at is like, it's going to take decades, right, to get those changes done, or do you think it could be done faster? Like,
no, I agree with you. Decades.
Yeah. Which is like, oh man,
Yeah.
like I'm ready to not deal with paperwork now, or like less paperwork now. Like I'm already drowning, and I'm just getting started. So that's good insight for sure.
Yeah, I mean, part of that starts with education about digital identity and wallet technology.
Right.
There is a sort of a fundamental need for decentralized identifiers, digital identity, again, in a privacy sort of sovereign sort of way, and then also a populace that's used to dealing with digital wallet technology.
God, it's going to be so hard.
That's a big challenge.
Is it though? Because we already use like Google and Apple profiles to log into websites without passwords. I mean, it's you're starting to see it a little more. I mean, it's not the.
You need a really strong. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, but it's like it's still that like same effect, right? Because I'm not like storing something, but it's still done in a centralized way. So it's like how do people start to understand the real power is when that is decentralized and it's even less susceptible to being hacked and exploited.
Right.
It's not saying in a database or server somewhere that could be compromised.
I completely agree with you. The one thing though I'll throw in there is those companies had billions of dollars to spend on UX and UI.
Yeah, exactly. That's the thing.
Definitely.
And they make it so seamless. Part of the problem is you're now throwing in decentralization, so there's less UX and UI. The user experience is a little bit more clunky, which will change over time. I think everybody's talking about improving that, which, we talk about it for a while, we build on it, and then eventually it gets there. So that's coming. But another challenge is when you're talking about digital identity and interacting with like things that are highly regulated, then you have the government.
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
So like the government allowing for, the government being a node and sort of having a monopoly on issuing identity is a challenge.
Yeah.
Like, how do you allow them to keep that monopoly of issuing, identification for their citizens, but still have like self-sovereign identity?
Yeah.
That's sort of an oxymoron, right? And there's got to be sort of a compromise there that people are way smarter than me are working on at TBD over at Block, or the is it WC3 or W3WC? I don't know. The acronym for the standards body that's handling digital identity and digital identifiers. That kind of stuff is difficult. It's like a big collective action problem. There's really not a huge monetary incentive for someone to work on that.
It's like an infrastructure thing.
It's infrastructure.
Yeah.
It's like a utility.
And it's like modern infrastructure. It's like, holy.
And Microsoft and some of these big companies have created digital identity, but it's centralized.
Yeah.
And if Microsoft is the vendor to the federal government or the state government on digital identity, then we've gone pretty far.
Absolutely.
In the non-decentralized direction.
Yeah, so how is Block, TBD/Block, because I know Jack Dorsey, he's got the decentralization ethos, but Block is a publicly traded company, so how would a Block government partnership lead to digital identity? Or is that just like they're in discovery phase almost?
I think I don't know enough about it to answer intelligently, but so I would just say that I trust their ethos to come up with a compromise there that's, compromise is a bad word for some people, but in my mind it's not, because in certain circumstances.
It's the magic word.
Because if you fail to reach a compromise, then you're going to be left with an outcome that's less optimal, right?
Or an outcome that's going to get reversed.
Yeah.
Yeah, because the whole reason why you're needing to be at a point of compromise is because there's someone with enough veto power or social capital to prevent you from doing what you think is the right thing, or a group thinks is the right thing to do. So, that now we're getting way off into the philosophical.
Well, that's the interesting stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm glad to hear that Block is working with the government on this personally, because I had no idea.
Well, now I don't know if they actually have any government contracts, but I do know that they're working on digital identity, and the company's it's a sub-entity of Block. Block has like Cash App and different things. It's called TBD.
Yeah, exactly.
The name of it.
I know barely anything about them, but I know
they're very secretive.
Yeah.
But I know they have this ethos of decentralization. I would love to see the business model that they create, but I think what they're probably doing is they're taking one for the team.
Yeah.
And they are creating technology that they may not profit that much from. And maybe there are some ways for them to profit, but certainly less than what Microsoft would profit if a state adopted them as a vendor for digital identity.
There's like second order effects, right? Like price of Bitcoin goes up, just from not directly, but people care about crypto more. Crypto goes up.
Yeah, true. But they're going to get that benefit anyways.
This is true. This is true.
Yeah, because we all know that's where things are headed.
This is true. Yeah.
In the long run.
Yeah.
I
have many questions. What do you think? Make sure we talk next session. Is it the 89th session that we're coming up on?
Coming up on it.
Let's take some time and talk about the big year coming up, right? So you've got the conference and you've got the session. So let's break it down for the audience. What's upcoming? What's the agenda? And what's the conference going to look like?
Yeah, my team is focused on both of those things. So the conference is going to be at the George Bush Presidential Library, November 20th and 21st. It's the North American Blockchain Summit. It's our fourth year to do it. And it'll be a little bit more institutional focused this year. Invitations and actually speaking accepted invitations from some of the biggest fund managers and registered investment advisors in the world, names that you guys would certainly know, like Fidelity and companies like that. So we're excited to have speakers from those types of institutions join our already awesome lineup of digital asset executives, elected officials. Of course, last year we had RFK and Vivek Ramaswamy and people like that. Neither of them are coming this year, just because neither of them will be in the presidential candidate race. But that's November. Of course, we have the election a few weeks before that.
Oh yeah. Crazy.
Who knows? We'll be making endorsements, of course. Both Democrats and Republicans, mostly state level endorsements, but we're making some federal endorsements as well. Mm-hmm. And then you got the election, our conference, and then the legislative session. The 89th session starts January. So we'll be filing bills in November, which is the earliest you can file them. It's a couple weeks after the election. And then those bills will start to get committee hearings probably in February and March, and then get voted on in April and May.
November's the biggest month ever.
It's going to be a big month. It's going to be a big month.
You might not sleep for a whole month.
I know. Well, I better. This summer we're taking a few vacations, so we're preparing.
Nice. So what's the legislative agenda? Walk us through.
There's a couple different things on the radar. Of course, the DAO bill. There is a bill that I find quite interesting that would require states to hold unclaimed property, if that unclaimed property is a digital asset, in its native form rather than instantly liquidating it, which is what we do now. So that I think is quite interesting. No, there's some exceptions to that. I think the unclaimed property registry in Texas, they do have some crypto in it, but for the most part, if a large corporation or there's like someone passes without a will, there's no a probate hearing can't determine. Anyways, it goes to the state that person lived in, and it's just called the Unclaimed Property Registry. And eventually, someone comes along, and if that person's still alive, they can go and Google their name on the Texas unclaimed property. At one time, I found $200 that Ally Bank owed me. They couldn't figure out where I was to send it to me, so they sent it to the state after a certain amount of time. Wow. So as crypto becomes more commonplace, and one day we'll get Fit 21, and one day we'll get a de minimis exemption so that we can actually spend, buy and sell. Like you'll hold your crypto where you have a low basis. Like if you have Bitcoin at a $10,000 basis, you'll want to segregate that and not spend it, right? Because you have a huge capital gains liability. But then you'll also have Bitcoin, Ether, crypto, whatever you're transacting in. For stable coins, you don't have to worry about this because there's no capital gains with a stable coin. But in the other ones, you'll need a de minimis exemption, and so you'll want to have some walking around money, if you will, that has a basis comparable to what the value is now, and you haven't made a huge gain or loss. Then you can spend that without any tax implications, if it falls within that de minimis range. Now we don't have that yet, but one day we will. Mm-hmm. All that to say, that's a federal thing, but the unclaimed property is a state thing. So we're working on that. We're working on keeping the status quo for Bitcoin mining, which is essentially they get treated like everybody else in the state of Texas. They're actually a better load than anybody else because they are a flexible load, which you have Bitcoin miners that are turning off during peak demand and they're turning on during low demand, which is exactly what we need. We just have to compress that duck curve of how, as a society, we use electricity. But people think that Bitcoin miners are a bad load on the grid. It's actually one of the best loads on the grid. It's sort of people's problem with subjectivity around the use and the value of Bitcoin that makes them have a problem with it.
It's a counterintuitive thing that I learned a lot about at the summit. Yeah,
it is very counterintuitive. Yeah. So we're working to maintain the status quo such that we won't see Bitcoin miners treated unfairly relative to their other peers, like AI data centers, which, by the way, are not flexible. Yeah. They're on all the time. And just because it has a more corporate ring to it, they're not under attack. But if you look at how those loads perform on the grid, there is a massive difference. Mm-hmm. So not trying to there are no subsidies for Bitcoin miners. We don't need subsidies. We just want to maintain the status quo. So that's another piece that we're working on. We also have a bill around blockchain land administration for counties to run parallel systems with blockchain-based land registries.
Oh, cool.
So that would be, of course, you don't want to flip that out and swap that out while you're flying. You want to run those in parallel for several years, probably.
Right.
And of course, You don't want to offend the title industry in Texas because they're very powerful.
Yeah, that goes back to my earlier question, because that's one of the big obstacles, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think one day, 50 years from now, title insurance is essentially, deregulated and not very necessary. I don't know if it ever fully goes away, but the premiums that we pay have to go way, way, way down.
It's crazy, yeah. So, okay, wait, is that the last one on the agenda? I'm very curious about the land registry thing.
Happy to jump into that. There's a couple other things that, but we have priorities, and some of the things that are lower down, we're just gonna, hope that it works and know that we don't have enough bandwidth to push it through. But some of the ones that we've talked about already are kind of like, priority ones. There's another concept that doesn't require legislation that I'll talk about on this podcast because I talked about it publicly already. It may or may not happen. I think it actually will happen. Is we are creating a charitable trust that the benefactor of which is the state of Texas. We're going to have people put Bitcoin into that trust.
Oh, I've heard, yeah.
And then, the state of Texas has to agree to hold that Bitcoin as Bitcoin on the balance sheet, not liquidate it. So the state of Texas then becomes the first state, not the first state to have Bitcoin exposure, because many states, including Texas, have Bitcoin exposure in their pension funds.
Yeah.
But that's through financial instruments and ETFs and other things. But the first state to truly have Bitcoin on the balance sheet, as the comptroller lists it, as an asset.
It's going to be a great marketing moment.
I think it could be really fun. And also there's a charitable benefit that the comptroller is able to then direct that to the beautification of the Capitol grounds, or the families of fallen DPS troopers, or some good cause.
Yeah.
Right? So, that's also a great thing about the digital asset industry is sort of the ability to do philanthropy.
Agreed.
I will, just as a disclaimer, or not a disclaimer, just as an aside, I will say that one thing we have to get better about as an industry is sort of the mechanics around paying taxes.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't pay taxes, probably around 10% based upon, on-chain wallet activity and the number of people that check the box on IRS tax forms that says I own or have transacted in crypto. Maybe depending on if a lot of people don't sell or transact in a given year, they just are acquiring, in which case maybe you aren't checking the box. But between 10 and 20% of people in the industry are properly paying their taxes, which is an extremely low number.
Yeah.
So part of that is not our fault, because it's very complex and there's not been a lot of great guidance from the IRS. But part of it is also just maybe early on there was no guidance, so there was a habit of just like, I don't know what to do, so therefore I'm not going to do anything. We have to get away from that.
Yeah. I mean, it's also the checkbox thing is interesting. I think we were talking about that. It's like, I see the checkbox almost as like you're building a log of people that could potentially you could go after, and like
that's another problem.
Yeah,
that is another problem.
Yeah.
I concur. I mean, privacy is key here, and so I have talked to senior counsel at the IRS about that very issue, and they have some guardrails put in place. I don't blame people for not trusting the federal government. I don't particularly trust the federal government, but I also believe that we have to pay taxes. So there is I've been checking the box for years. I've not yet been audited.
You are a very public figure. The hammer could come down.
The hammer could come down, and I think they would find that I probably paid more taxes than I needed to pay. Hopefully, I've paid about the right amount. But it is very complex.
Well, there could be a compelling case where it's like, hey, maybe we talk about crypto taxes go to an innovation department in Texas, but there's Texas has complex tax laws.
It comes back to we just need more guidance on some of these basic things, because you have a lot of people who want to do the right thing and are either just saying, well, this seems good enough, or I'm only going to pay taxes if I off ramp it to USD, or so there's we're kind of making up rules because there's nothing that's formalized in the guidance. So I think that would be hugely helpful, and because now it's interesting too with the ETFs that have the underlying assets in Bitcoin and Ethereum, right? Like those will follow ETF and capital gains rules.
Pretty easily, yeah.
Yeah, so it begs to, now, this year, it seems like, okay, well then standard capital gains should apply. So treat it like that. But again, until there's really guidance, we don't really know, and just hope we're doing the right thing and not getting, on a list of backlog.
And part of the problem is just the technology is so far advanced of like our tax reporting regime that's part of the problem. Like the IRS has done a decent job of getting certain guidance out there, but they have not done a good job of like understanding digital assets and how onerous it is on the reporter to like. I cannot stand spending more than like 3 or 4 hours on my taxes. Like the number of hours that Americans spend on our taxes, I forgot the stat, but it's really, really asinine and bad. Yeah. And that's probably not the IRS's fault, although we would like to blame them for that. It's probably Congress's fault for making them do so many weird things in the tax code. But what we need, I think, is we need a lot of things. We need the IRS to get a little bit more savvy on this. We need the digital asset industry to lean in a little bit, but we also need these tax preparation software companies to integrate in a more seamless way. Yeah. And companies like TaxBit, and there's a lot of others that are doing it in a really great way, but it's not yet like Google and Amazon, and like it's not as seamless as it needs to be for like just the everyday person to be like, all right, I don't mind spending 15 minutes on this. Let me get my, But for most of us, it's like, this could be many, many, many hours.
It's gonna be days for me.
Days.
Yeah, I mean, I got my extension. I'm not looking forward to sitting down and doing this.
I know.
And I feel like every year, on-chain activity gets more complex.
Yeah.
There's more dApps to use, so it's like, oh my goodness.
Yeah. I don't yet use the tax software, but I'm pretty sure it's free for individuals.
Yeah, there's other ones.
Yeah.
For sure.
I mean, I obviously use tax software. I don't use crypto tax software yet, but I've experimented and played around with it a little bit, mostly because I'm just hodling and not doing a lot of transactions. But
probably saves you a lot of time and headache.
Yeah.
No meme coins.
Yeah, just trying to like hold and not get stressed out about where different things are going.
That's my mantra too. Just long-term focus.
Yeah.
Should we talk about the DAO bill at all?
I think we should.
Yeah. Megan, I don't know if you want to.
We could do should we do a recap of last session for the audience?
Yeah.
Because we talked about it earlier, but there are probably people that don't know what happened.
Yeah.
The epic story of the ATX DAO TBC, the DAO bill.
I don't know.
Yeah. Well, so I guess it started as an idea, right? And we had some DAO members before you and I got involved. There were other DAO members of our community that took it upon themselves to go and provide testimony at the work group, which you were part of.
And it was very well received, very professionally delivered.
Shout out Sam Padilla.
Yeah, Sam Padilla. Brennan Mulligan also put in a ton of research on that as well.
Yeah, he did.
And so just bringing together that brain power and then to have such positive feedback was great. I think that's what kind of kicked the snowball. And then from there, it was just getting more and more eyes on it. And then fortunately ending up with some very serendipitous contacts where we were able to work directly with the team at A16Z and also David Kerr, who have done a ton of research in this space. Carlo Reyes, who was head of the work group, the Texas work group on blockchain matters as well. All these people have incredibly published, hundreds of pages of opinions and research on this that really helps lay a baseline. And then it was like all of a sudden we were in a position where we have a sponsor through Representative Busey. Next thing you know, like we're walking around to committee members' offices in the Capitol. Not an experience I ever thought would be on my personal life plan, but here we are.
Duty calls.
Exactly. You do what you need to do, and then to then have those one-on-one conversations with the policymakers and legislatures who weren't necessarily familiar with the blockchain, first of all, let alone DAOs. And then, as we were mentioning earlier in this recording too, just we received unanimous approval through the committee in the House, which was amazing. And then ran out of time in the Senate just because of time. So I think we also, I think, filed in February.
We genuinely
Super
were
late.
late. We were
Because all these things, I mean, it was like...
we were new, you know.
We were new. We didn't really know what we were doing.
Well, and we were still making changes.
Yeah.
Like,
Still making changes.
we
still
couldn't have
making-
filed earlier, I don't think, because the bill
No.
wasn't ready to be filed.
Yeah, well, we had a whole separate bill, right? And then we were just blessed to have David and Miles come in, and we were like, oh my God, these are like the preeminent experts. They've got their they're going to redo this. Oh, okay. We then we're really late.
Yeah.
But Representative Busey was a huge supporter, which is amazing.
Exactly.
To have him
and Allison on his
Allison
team,
is the
and
best.
Chief of Staff, just was amazing, and just like keeping all the pieces moving, and super interesting experience for myself personally to be involved, but really
Megan was doing the testimony. She was killing it.
that
Yeah,
was
you were.
also not something I thought would be on my professional life path, but also a great experience, and then just having the guidance of your team through that, because we're kind of the new kids on the block here. And I think now, as we were talking about earlier before we started this conversation, but really starting to look at what are the use cases where we can point to organizations like ATX DAO and all these non-nefarious organizations and communities that are actually doing things, public services. So we're happy to use ourselves as use cases, and just to really continue that trajectory a lot earlier than the last time. So yeah, we're excited to be part of it and to be an extension of you and your team to help see that through, because I do think that it would be very beneficial for the overall narrative of Texas to continue to be a leader in the space. I mean, some of these other areas are great. Proof of reserves is an amazing concept that I think should be, just available everywhere. And but the business stuff and the boring things, like we were talking about earlier, are often the ones that provide the most utility because they provide that safe, sound guidance. So yeah, I'm just excited that we're having the conversations early with people, getting the feedback, and so that when we ultimately do file, hopefully we've at least cut out a lot of that noise that happens.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. We'll still have the noise, I think, no matter how much education we do. But I think one area, though, that we will be sure to do this year that we weren't able to do last year just because of the timing of everything is we'll get it filed in both chambers and drive from both directions rather than just one direction and have to go over to the other chamber and late in the game. And that was just a function of having it late. Having it filed late, we couldn't file in both chambers at that point because the Senate at that point had the relevant committee wasn't even taking new bills at that point.
We didn't have a sponsor either.
Yeah.
But there obviously were people that would sponsor it, but we didn't have one prepared.
Right.
Yeah. I think the time is right too, though. We're a great use case of what a DAO can be. We're also a great use case of an organization that had to really go through trouble to get an actual structure put together that I don't think it's necessarily right that we should have had to do.
And by trouble you mean time,
money. Yeah, it was expensive.
Resources.
Yeah.
I mean, I definitely got burnt out from part of that experience, and it was cost way more than we expected, took way longer than we expected.
Well, no, we have all these other cities in Texas that are trying to replicate or are inspired by what ATX DAO did. So we have Dallas, Fort Worth, Houston. All these people are hey, we want to build a community here, a non-profit style social good community of Web3 enthusiasts. But not everyone has all this money to spend on a lawyer or to even. It's also is it a lost cause to try and build an organization that's not welcome in the state? So. I think we definitely have the support of the narrative behind us right now with all the federal momentum. We have Texas is just great for crypto, and we have Ted Cruz mining Bitcoin now. Not like he's going to be working on this bill, but I think that vibe trickles down. Hopefully.
Yeah, I hope so too. Yeah, it's going to be a slog, but. Grateful to have you guys there as advocates, and Representative Busey is an Austin area representative. I think he's Williamson County, North Austin. So to have ATX DAO members living in his district that's
It's a good story
It's
to
a good
tell.
story to tell. Yeah.
Yeah, and they're all a lot of entrepreneurs, you know. So it's a real thing.
Yeah. Really is.
Do you remember those billboards? Crypto is real.
Yeah.
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 They were a little bit missed time. I think we could use them now,
Yeah.
but they were not there at the right time. Bring them back.
True.
Yeah.
True.
Those are all over Austin. I never saw any in Dallas.
They were all over Austin. Some guy just took it upon himself to fund that. I should find him and ask him to do it again.
Or like maybe spend that money more effectively.
Yeah,
It's like, if you're going to just light $50,000 on fire, there's a couple other ways you could do that.
It's true. It's true.
Grassroots advocacy.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I guess, but to try to wrap up a little too, is what's the ask that, like, how could our listeners, how could our ATX DAO community support you? What are the things that we could do to, I mean, Mike is yours, so ask away.
I think the most important thing is amplifying our influence in various legislatures. Right now, that's probably the Texas legislature. If you had asked me a month ago before the FIT and SAB votes, I would have said, start making your calls and your emails to your federal delegation of Texas legislators. Now it's get to know your state reps, call their office, go see them. I mean, literally I'm asking people to go, make a phone call, set up a meeting with a staffer, legislative director, that'd be the best person to meet with. Say, I want to meet with, you go on who represents me, Texas, you type in your address, you figure out who your state rep and your state senator is, not Congress, but state rep, state senator, and you call that office, the district office, and then for Austin people, it's like oftentimes the same thing, or you can go to the Capitol as well. So district or Capitol office for those in Austin, and meet with that legislative director, let them know that you care deeply about this issue, and that you don't have a specific ask, but you just wanted to engage, start the relationship, and that that there's going to be bills coming in front of them next session that relate to digital asset innovation, and that you want to see Texas, and you want to see them as your representative, vote yes on those.
Yeah.
And then later on, when we actually have the real ask, like we'll send out a mass email like, hey, go see them tomorrow.
Well, I just love how accessible the legislatures can be. I didn't realize that just anybody could reach out and set a meeting, so that's great. I mean, yeah, awesome.
The Texas reps are extra accessible, I think, compared to.
Go call them, go see them, set a meeting with their ledge director, and start to build a relationship.
Nice. All right, we can wrap it so you can get back to work.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, this is fun.
Yeah, so good to see you.
Y'all too.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the ATX DAO podcast. If you like what you heard, please rate, subscribe, and share the podcast with your friends and colleagues. To learn more about ATX DAO, visit us at atxdao.com and follow us on X, Farcaster, and LinkedIn at ATX DAO. Thanks again for listening, and we'll catch you in the next episode.